Ladies and gentlemen, today we got to talk about something a little different. This is a theological topic today. Now, I am not a practicing Christian, okay? I grew up in a Christian household and was raised more or less Calvinist, all right, Protestant, and grew up in a Calvinist background. And a lovely girl that I know has sent me it was a podcast discussing free will, okay? This is a big deal. The Calvinist versus Arminius point of view, or Armenian point of view. And what it is a discussion between free will or determinism or sovereignty. Okay, that's what they call it, God's sovereignty. Now, before I get into this, I would like, this girl doesn't know, this friend of mine probably doesn't know that I'm making this video. And I'm not sure if she wanted me to make a video about it. I don't even know if she knows that I have a YouTube channel, but wait, no, she probably does. I don't know, I just started this like a week or two ago, but we've been getting so many viewers, it's been pretty crazy. But I would like to handle this with the utmost respect and try to be extremely respectful towards this. And some people might consider or say to me, well, if you're not a practicing Christian, maybe you have no right to discuss this and talk about this. But in a lot of ways, this topic of free will within Christianity was sort of what taught me to think, or gave me the love of thinking about ideas in a sort of ideal way, and thinking about concepts like this. I fell in love with this. I've spent many nights up discussing with my father and listening to my father discuss this with my uncle and many other people, and it was always a interesting concept to me, because what we're dealing with, there's what I'll just cut to the chase and tell you what I think about it. I think that it is a paradox in a lot of ways. But this podcast, I think, had a very good answer. And it's an answer that me and my father had discussed. I don't know if my father got it from somewhere or if he came up with it on his own or if we developed it together. I don't know, really. But it sounded extremely similar to things that I'm familiar with. And so I think it's a beautiful way of sort of explaining Calvinism or explaining how God can reign sovereignly without being the author of sin. Now, I'm not 100% sure about that. I'm not 100% sure about that, but we'll get into that here. But Christians that are watching this video, and I don't want to say the person's name that got me thinking about this, because I don't know if she wants her name on here, because I don't want you guys to harass her. I don't think you would. I trust you guys, but just in case, I don't want anybody to harass her. So we need to come up with a good name for her that I can reference. Who does she remind me of from a novel? Natasha. We're gonna call her Natasha. She kind of reminds me of Natasha from War and Peace in some ways. Lovely girl. But okay, so I want to try to handle this respectfully. I'm not trying to make anybody doubt their faith. I'm not trying to upset anybody by these discussions. But let's go ahead and set the stage here. So, what is the Arminius point of view, or Armenian point of view? It is that if God is perfect, right? So therefore, but God has expectations on human beings to follow his law, his moral code, and his ethics, right? And that means, what that essentially means is that we have to have free will for this to exist, right? Because if we don't have free will to make choices in our lives, that means that we had no other choice but to make mistakes and sin, right? It also means that God is not creating human beings for what one of my other friends would call a pot to poop in. This is an interesting, you'd have to know this guy. He came up with this idea that what it means essentially is people that God creates in order to just go be sent to hell, right? Because if they didn't have any choice, if they didn't have free will, then presumably there are some people that never had a choice anyways, because they don't have free will to make, so they're not morally responsible for their actions. They have no other choice, okay? So they get sent to hell. God made them as a pot to poop in, okay? So the Arminians don't like this idea. So they say that we must, as humans, be able to make choices. Now, what's the problem with this? An all-knowing, all-powerful God has to know every little detail of our lives. And it says this in the Bible. He knows every hair on your head. He knows every breath you take. If this is true, then how is he not going to know your decision making and the choices that you're going to make? Okay, if he is all powerful, and say, there's a reason why I said set the stage, is because this will come in later. But say that a playwright writes a play, like Shakespeare or like Sophocles or somebody like that. They necessarily are outside of the play. They're the director, right? That's kind of like God. And he lays out the play and knows everything that happens within it, right? Like I just said. So if that's the case, are the actors able to surprise, are any of the lines within the play going to surprise the director? No, he wrote them. He knows what's happening, okay? So the idea that we just have free will and we can kind of surprise God doesn't make any sense, does it? Okay? So that's the Armenian point of view, is that we must have some sort of moral responsibility for people. Okay, God's a just God. He's not just going to send people to hell when they had no other choice. Okay. What do I mean by no other choice? Because in Romans it says that I believe it says in Romans that the will of God, the law is written on each individual's heart. Okay, so this is basically saying it's an argument for natural law. Okay, everybody has this sort of ingrained within them in their programming, right? Think about us as like AI computers. We have base programming, and that is that we know what is good and evil. Okay, since Adam and Eve, we know what good and evil is. So that must mean that any choices that we make that are counter to our programming would be counter to God, what God wants us to do. What it means is that we know the right thing to do, but we choose not to do it. How many times do you choose not to do the right thing? Probably a lot of times. Most of the time, you probably do know what the right answer is. Okay, there are plenty of times when maybe you don't. Okay, but to lie, say, let's just give a quick example. To lie, right? Everybody does it all the time. You knew that it was the wrong thing to do, but it was easier in the moment to lie. Okay. But you know that this is not the case. So the problem is that you still don't have any, if you didn't have any choice to make that decision in the first place, even if you knew about it, what's the deal with that? So the big question for this video was, is God, what is the nature of evil? Why does God allow evil? And if God is totally sovereign, in other words, if we live in a deterministic universe, how does that work? How is God not the author of sin? And so there's a couple ways of explaining it. The first one, actually I think that this might have just been the whole answer, was the idea of everything works for the good, right? Everything works out for the good. right? In that, I believe what book is that? Where the story of Joseph. This is mentioned within the podcast that they're talking about. That he says what they meant for evil, talking about Joseph's brothers, God meant for good. Now, everybody has kind of experienced this within their lives, where they can look at something in their lives and sort of picture this horrible thing that they didn't understand when it was happening. And then they look back and say, well, if it weren't for that happening, I would have never achieved this greater thing. I would have never seen, they have a sort of clarity about things. I'll give you a good example. Somebody asked me how I bought this house, why I bought this house. I was fresh out of what I would consider a pretty rough breakup. I'm not going to get into it, but me and my girlfriend broke up, and I was still at the time living at my parents' house, and I got an offer like right when this was happening. I was completely shattered, and this offer came up because my neighbor is my boss's mother. So she knew that this house was going up for sale and it was a totally reasonable price. So I was like, you know what? If I stay here with my parents in my parents' basement, I'm gonna wanna kill myself, okay? Basically, I needed something to do, and this place needed fixed up. You see all this, this is my living room. This had old wallpaper and like 4 layers of wallpaper. Now I happen to be very good at mudding, like sheetrock mud, drywall compound. If any of you know what that is, it's like this mud, okay? And I skim coated this entire thing. This used to be popcorn ceiling. I skim coated the entire thing. This took me a long time. So this became the thing for me to do to get away from this sort of thing that was happening in my life that was really unpleasant and I really didn't like. And I was in a really, you're not yourself when you're going through a rough time. And this was my escape. But it also served to be the next step in my life where it's like I'm out on my own. I get to become sort of my own person in a way. You notice this when you move out of your parents' house. Many people do this way sooner than I did. But I was 22. Okay, this was like last year. You become a different person. It's a new part of a new step in your life, right? And I look back at that experience and I say, that was God. He dropped this sort of thing into my lap, right? That was perfect for me. And I also had Tolstoy and Dostoevsky to help me through it too. It was great. So at the time it was like, man, this is like so bad. It was a lot, it was taxing on my mind, right? But this great thing came out of it. So that's the idea, is that God uses all things for the good of those who love him, right? So why does evil happen? It's not that God is the author of evil, but he allows evil so that he can counter the evil with a good, okay? Now I have a little bit of questions about this answer, right? So this is the first level of what's brought up. So this is the kind of everybody sort of knows this proposition. There's another part to this which I'll get to. Now here's the issue that I have with everything works out for the good of those who love him. Everything works out for the good. Is this, that I'm a carpenter, right? I build houses. So let's say in an ideal, let's just go on a journey in our minds for a second. I'm building a very good house. Now in this example, I'm God, okay? And I'm building a very good house. Now this brings up a quick question. We got to take a quick diversion. Can a perfect being create anything that is perfect? Or does he necessarily have to create things that are less than perfect? Because as the late great Norm Macdonald brought up, if a perfect being were to create more perfect things, it would just be expansion of that perfect thing. In other words, the perfect thing is a monism. It's a one. Okay, we're getting all Parmenian right now, like Parmenides, a little bit. But it's just expansion. So that brings up now, somebody may have a better answer than that. I just, think that's an interesting idea. Can a perfect being create a perfect thing? Or does it have to be less than perfect, or else it would just be him, right? A little interesting thought for you to think about. But I can't create, let's say I'm a perfect being and I can't create a perfect house, but I can create a good house. Remember when God creates the heavens and the earth and all that? He says it was good, right? So I create a good house. Now, I have, not myself, but this little guy that comes around during my project that I'm building this good house. And we're gonna call him the Molinaxian. Those of you who know me know what I'm referencing. So the Molinaxian comes in, and he's a little guy, he's got his little hood on, and he comes in with a crowbar and a sledgehammer, and he comes in and just messes everything up, and it costs the homeowner, right? The homeowner doesn't like it because I'm messing up, because the Molinaxian is messing up their nice house. Now I could stop the Molinaxian. All I have to say is, hey, Molinaxian, stop. And Molinaxian would stop. Now, but I make a good house at the end of it. Everything is great, right? Would you hire me if you knew that was going to happen? The perfect carpenter builds the good house, but the Molinaxian cost the homeowner plenty of turmoil, because think about this. I've built this really nice house and they're living in the house, the good house. And all the time, things are getting broken up and maybe they get hit with stuff and sort of things hurt them. But I say, look, I didn't have to build you this house in the first place, buddy. Is that good enough? Would you hire me if you knew that the Molinaxian, if I could stop the Molinaxian from doing it, would you still hire me? Would you call me a good carpenter? Would you consider me a perfect carpenter for doing that? You understand the point that I'm making here, right? If God can stop evil, why doesn't he? Why doesn't he? Why did the tree of the knowledge of good and evil exist in the first place? If we could have had everything that was just perfect, if God could have just built the perfect house and it would be fine, why do we have to have this turmoil? And that's where this other answer comes in. It's this, back to the play analogy. So we have the playwright. And imagine it's Sophocles, and we're in Greek tragedy, right? And we see Oedipus come out on the stage, and everything's just perfect. How interesting would that be? Not very interesting, would it? So this new idea is called the everything works out for the glory of God. So God allows evil in order to glorify himself. Is this satisfactory? I still don't think it's satisfactory to me. Let's go back to the house analogy. I let the Molinaxian destroy all the windows and hurt the customers because I want them to say, wow, even though the Molinaxian destroyed the house a million times, that good carpenter Silas, the perfect carpenter Silas, he fixed it up every time. Okay, it may not be a satisfactory answer. I don't think it's a satisfactory answer to me. Now, here's the other thing to think about. Is this, the idea of non-vacuous contrast, okay? That is that think about things like black and white, okay? Without, or light and dark. You can't have just light without having a concept of dark, the opposite, right? So, within this podcast too, it was interesting. He says that we revolve around God. God doesn't revolve around us. And he says that God is like the sun. Does this remind you of Plato? Because I guarantee you that's where this idea comes from. But, also river valley civilizations, sun worship. All right, Egypt, the Egyptians worship the sun too, okay? All right, not just Plato, but of course, I love Plato, so I gotta bring up Plato. Okay, but We revolve around God. This is God's story. So let's employ Job a little bit. Who are we to question God and what God wants to do with his play, essentially? That is an argument to be made, is that are you really going to argue with the author of the universe? In some ways, you got to just put up with it. I think that's what Job is about. Now, if God is a truly just God, we need to figure out what God means by justice, okay? You can tell that I've been thinking about Plato a lot. I've been thinking about the Republic. This is exactly what we're going through right now, is the Republic. What is justice? Here's another Platonic idea. I can't remember which dialogue this is from, but the idea essentially is the question, do the gods like things and therefore they are just, or they are good? Let me just start over. Do the gods like things and therefore they are good, or are things good and therefore the gods like them? Okay, this is a question of whether or not God can change his mind and just sort of flippantly say this is good, and since the ultimate driving force in the universe said it was good, therefore it is. Or are things always good? Are things always stay the same as this sort of essence of goodness, like in Plato, the form of the good, and therefore God likes them? I like that idea more. I like Plato's sort of answer to that a little better. But within the Bible, when we're talking about Yahweh, think about God's version of justice within the book of Job. Now, this seems a little different from the rest of the Bible. I could be wrong. I'm not a theologian. I'm just some kid on YouTube talking, okay? So challenge me in the comments, but be respectful, okay? If you're a Christian, look, you may think I'm your enemy. I'm not. I'm really not. I love you guys. You're my brothers and sisters, not in Christ, but I still love you. And I know that there's that thing about if you're not with me, then you're against me. I'm not against you, okay? So try not to get too angry at the things that I'm saying, because I don't mean it, and I would like to receive knowledge, okay, if you have it, but I'd like to receive it in a respectful way. And anybody else who disagrees, because I'm sure, here's the thing about Christians, is you're either, and we're talking about Calvinism, so you're either a Calvinist and you like Calvinism, or you're not a Calvinist and you hate Calvinism. It seems to be. So be respectful to your brothers and sisters in Christ as well. But where was I going with that? In the book of Job, he talks to Job when Job is like, this is totally unjust. I've been the just man. I've done everything you've told me to do, and you are punishing me completely unjustly. Now, what's God's answer to that? You worm. Don't you know? He comes to him in a whirlwind, the most sort of elemental force of power, and says, you worm, Job. Who are you to question, I am bigger than the Leviathan? Who created the Leviathan? I did. What does this argument remind you of? It should remind you of justice is the advantage of the stronger. He says, Job, I'm stronger than you, therefore I am just. Okay, so what does God mean by justice? And are we as humans equipped to find out what that is? Is it just that whatever God tells you in the moment is what is just? All right, think about when Yahweh orders the Israelites to massacre the Canaanites. I know I'm bringing out a lot of really sensitive topics right now, and I know that these are hard, difficult topics. I'm not trying to make you question your faith. I really am not. These are questions that I have, and I can't help but voice them. Okay, so I'm trying to be respectful, but when Yahweh brings up that we must slaughter the Canaanites, we must kill the women, the children, the oxen, leave nothing breathing, How does that relate to thou shalt not murder? Are the kids responsible? Should we murder children because God said so? In other words, is it wrong to kill children every time, no matter what? Do these things change? Is God a moral relativist? There are plenty of things, plenty of people that I'm sure have some sort of apologetic argument for this, and that's totally fine. I will read your comments. I read all of them. Okay, I will read your arguments if you have arguments against this. I can't help but think that it is a little bit relativistic. But what does God mean by justice? We went on a big tangent, but in the system of, wouldn't it be more interesting if we had some opposition to good, and this is God's play. This is I think an interesting, cool way of looking at the story of the world, and that there is this idea of non-vacuous contrast. There can't be just good. There has to be some evil. There has to be contrast within the world. Okay, so I liked the podcast very much, and I like the story. But I think that it also has to lead you to, I don't know if it answers the question of if God if God allows evil, if it is a predetermined universe, God has to know everything, because otherwise he wouldn't be all-knowing. He has to know, therefore he could change any evil action that happens, and he chooses not to. Wouldn't that make him responsible? If I knew that let's say, a close colleague of mine was going to go murder somebody tomorrow, and I had every opportunity to stop it, and I didn't, they would make me an accomplice. I would be somebody that had knowledge of it. I took no action to stop it. I would be liable. Okay. These are just questions that I have. If people can enlighten me on this, I will listen. I will read your comments. And these are just sort of some interesting questions that I have. But I do think that it is a very beautiful and poetic way of looking at this problem. As far as the issue of free will versus a predetermined or a deterministic universe, I would be more on the side of, if I were a Christian, I think I would have to believe in some level of free will, which doesn't really compute. I think it's a paradox, because if we have free will, that means God's not all powerful. He's like, oh, what's that guy doing? Oh man, I really didn't expect that. No, you're not getting up on God. So this is a paradox. What this argument is, the reason that it's been around so long, is because it's like Michael Segru would say, it's like trying to swim without any water. You're not getting anywhere with it. But it is an important question. And it's always been a fun one for me. It's always been fun to think about. All right, sometimes it is fun to try to swim without any water. I think I'll try that right now, actually. See, I'm not getting anywhere. But it's fun to try. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you are respectful in the comments. I hope this doesn't offend you. I hope you know that I'm not trying to challenge anybody's faith. I'm just trying to give you some interesting things to think about. All right, goodbye.